Okay.
Just click it one more time. Sometimes it takes 2 times.
I've just switched my screens around, so
It's okay.
Nothing's fully set up here. Let me just escape out of this and start again. There we go. How's that looking?
Now we see your notes.
Now you see my notes. Perfect. There we go.
That's great.
Okay, so let's just move over to the next slide. So good morning. As Nyla has already mentioned, today's meeting is introduce the second draft of the 2022 to 2026 financial plan. We will start the morning by going through a brief overview of the financial planning process and our public engagement. Our financial officer, Nyla Atiana, will then take over and introduce the 2022 consolidated budget alongside the financial officer's report. After this, we'll move into the departmental budget presentations, of which will include an overview of each department and their responsibilities, operating budget highlights for each department, and presentation of projects. Each manager will allow for questions and comments after each of their presentations, and finally we'll touch on the next steps of the financial plan, followed by a question period. So Mayor and Council, you should have all received a budget package prior to this meeting, of which includes the full 2022 to 2026 draft financial plan, also referred to as our 5-year plan. A consolidated budget for 2022 titled 2022 Consolidated Revenue and Expenses by Service Area within your package, of which shows a summary of the funding sources, including draft taxation amounts and expenses for each fund, i.e. General Fund, Water Fund, and Sewer Fund. Individual project sheets of which have been provided in order of presentation, a summary of all projects set to occur throughout 2022 and their funding sources, and finally a summary of all projects set to occur throughout the period of this financial plan, alongside their funding sources. These documents are also available via the Talk Tofino website if any members of the public wish to view them. So local governments are required by legislation to adopt a 5-year financial plan on an annual basis. Some of the key features that this financial plan must meet are projects and expenditures are to be in line with the Council's strategic plan. You will notice on the project sheets and slides throughout the presentation that, if applicable, we have referenced the specific strategic goals and priorities that each project is in line with. The financial plan must also be balanced, i.e. revenues must equal expenses. However, as our financial officer previously mentioned, the budget presented has not yet been balanced due to some key projects, such as the wastewater treatment plant still being finalised. More details on this will be provided when we discuss the consolidated budget as part of the financial officer's report. So this is just an overview of some of the key dates of the financial planning process up until this point. In October, we held our first special budget meeting where we introduced the first draft of the 5-year plan. In January, we received the completed assessment roll, of which staff are currently using to calculate draft tax rates. And then today we're presenting the second draft of the plan. After today's meeting, some further key dates will include a virtual town hall meeting to be held February 16th. More details are going to be provided on this later in the presentation. In February and March, we will hold another special budget meeting. That one will focus solely on the property taxation. In March, we will receive the revised assessment roll, of which will allow staff to update the draft tax rates. And a final special budget meeting will be held in March or April, where we will present the third and final draft of the 5-year plan. Adoption of the financial plan and taxation bylaw will take place in April and May. This infographic summarizes the district's complete financial planning and reporting cycle. We are currently in the budget presentations and public engagement stage of the cycle and are in the process of moving into the next stage, which will be to balance the budget and develop tax rates. And the bylaws are to be adopted by May 15th at latest. Quarterly progress reports will then be presented to Council for Q2 in August and then Q3 in October. Q4 will be presented to Council as part of the audit report in the new year. We then go back into the budget development stage throughout June to October. The purpose of public engagement is to engage the community into the budget planning process. The District of Tofino Communication Strategy outlines the following 4 objectives that specifically relate to the financial plan. To increase public confidence in the district's responsible management of tax dollars, increase awareness and understanding of how tax dollars are allocated, generate participation in the financial planning process, and to support responsiveness to mitigate concerns and address any issues that may arise. Through our engagement process and our additional communications related activities, we do hope to meet these objectives. So prior to adopting the financial plan, a local government is required by legislation to undergo public consultation and engagement. This is an opportunity for the community to learn about the process, review proposed projects, and submit comments and questions for consideration. Historically, the District of Tofino has had 2 distinct consultation periods in November and February. However, with the implementation of our online engagement tool, Talk Tofino, we have had the opportunity to engage with the community for the duration of the financial planning process and update content as we reach milestones within this process. In the past, the district has held an in-person town hall meeting at the community hall prior to the adoption of the budget. After request from Council during the October 14th first draft presentation, we have now planned a virtual town hall meeting, which is set to occur on Feb 16th, as no in-person events are currently being scheduled due to the pandemic. So as mentioned in the last slide, we have now implemented an online engagement site, talktofino.ca. Some of the key features of this site are the option to subscribe to updates, frequently asked questions such as general information, information on financial planning, and BC assessments. Detail on the financial planning timeline is also available, and links to meeting agendas and related documents. Videos of the special budget meetings, including this meeting, of which will be uploaded to the site within the next couple of days. There is also a Q&A forum, which is regularly monitored. Our communication coordinator, Sarah Gray, has kindly provided some stats on the public engagement related to the financial plan. So the Talk Tofino Budget 2022 page has had 76 individual user views at the time of preparing this presentation. Currently, no specific feedback has been received. However, this is anticipated to change as our communication shift from the education to specific departmental projects and proposals. Social media content continues to focus on education, with over 2,000 individuals having now been reached and over 30 engagements, such as likes and shares on these posts. So other engagement opportunities that have not already been mentioned include such things as providing input during the public comment question periods at the special budget meetings. Questions and comments can also be emailed to budget@tofino.ca, which is also a regularly monitored email. And information will also be provided within the annual Tofino tax guides, where you will find a summary of the 5-year financial plan, property tax information, and space for written feedback, which can be dropped off at the municipal office. So the virtual town hall meeting is a new meeting format due to no in-person events currently being scheduled. This is currently scheduled to take place on February 16th from 4 p.m. to 6 p.m. It will be an opportunity for Council to speak with the community on the financial plan with the support of the management team. We are proposing a structured format, which will be 2 hours in length, with 30 minutes at the start for a brief financial plan recap and questions as a group, followed by 2 30-minute breakout sessions with each department, with each breakout session including 1 staff member and 1 council member, and then a 30-minute Q&A to finish. On registration, participants will have the option to select the 2 breakout sessions that they would like to attend during the virtual town hall. Questions from the public will be encouraged throughout. And this includes the financial planning process and public engagement portion of the presentation. I will now move on to the questions and comments, but we'll leave the current slide on screen just in case Council would like to discuss the proposed format of the virtual town hall meeting or provide guidance on how they may want to see it. Okay.
Thank you, Alex. So if Council does not have any questions on engagement or virtual town hall, we can move on to the financial officer's report. Okay, I will move on. Thank you, Alex. Just take us a moment to stop sharing and reshare. Okay, so my report today is going to include an overview of the 5-year financial plan, starting with an economic overview and update. Then I'll go into financial plan balancing considerations, and then I will provide a brief overview on the 2022 consolidated budget and where we are at with both balancing the plan and where the various revenue sources will be coming from, and then a loans and long-term debt update. And then I'll go into a discussion regarding property assessments and taxation. And as previously mentioned, I won't be providing any tax calculations today or draft tax rates. That will come at a later date. So with the exception of 2020, it's not typical for me to provide an economic overview for Council, but we have experienced some impacts in the economy as it relates to our municipal budgets this year. We are seeing significant inflationary increases across the board that are impacting our operational and capital budgets. And this is typical from year to year as it relates to our requirement to increase our base level of taxation to meet our operational requirements by about 2% per year. With the extra pressures we're seeing with inflation, we are looking at a higher base level tax increase this year, which I will discuss a little bit later on in the presentation. We're seeing higher increases or continued increases to hydro and higher increases to fuel over the last year. And we are finding that the responses to our tenders and proposals are exceeding our engineering estimates. Similarly, with proposals or RFPs sent out for goods and services, we're seeing those prices come in higher, which are impacting project timelines and our ability to be able to carry out some of the projects that were originally budgeted for. So these are some things and assumptions that we look at when we're trying to determine what the appropriate increase is to our base level taxation in order to meet our operational requirements. So we are, because of seeing these pressures, looking at a higher base level taxation increase than 2%. So the pandemic continues to cause future uncertainty for us, which means that we're seeing lack of resource availability, not just with goods and services, but with staffing across or throughout the province, and that is impacting project timelines, our ability to carry out the project as originally anticipated. So in addition to inflationary increases, there are some cost drivers in our budget. These are some examples, and we'll go over some more as the managers present throughout the day. But we've seen increases in insurance premiums for our property insurance and cyber. With cyber attacks on the rise, we saw a significant increase of our cyber policies over last year. We will be seeing some increases to other agency levies. I will highlight the regional district, which is not a surprise to us, with new programs coming online like composting and regional transit. We have anticipated increases in those areas in previous financial planning years. We recently increased the fire and life safety bylaw. It was estimated at approximately 2% increase of taxation. However, that's been minimized by some of the long-term debt and loans that have been paid off over the last year for the fire truck, which I'll go into more in a moment. We're seeing increased costs related to IT support for council as we move towards providing more support for IT in this area, which we'll go over in a bit more detail later on in the presentation. And as mentioned in the first financial plan, with reductions to DCCs for affordable housing development on DL 114, we're seeing the financial impact there. So we are working on how to fund that reduction to DCCs. We don't have that finalized and incorporated into the financial plan at this stage. What will be critical for us to do, and in consideration of these inflationary increases and these cost drivers we are seeing in the budget, is focusing now on completing the financial year end, finalizing the financials and completing the audit process and determining what the 2021 surpluses were. It will be imperative for us to reassign any of our outstanding 2021 budget items and move those revenue sources into 2022, which we're currently working on. That's not reflected in today's financial plan. And then moving forward surpluses from previous years. We also have available to us the COVID Restart Grant funds, which I'll provide an update on in the presentation a little bit later on. So I'm going to open another spreadsheet now to go over the consolidated 2022 budget, which is likely a familiar document to council. And this is my opportunity to show council what the total expenditures are and where those are coming from in the 2022 budget, and where those revenue sources are coming from and where we're seeing that pressure on taxation. So in column E here, the total expenses in this year's budget are $36,191,504. And that is not surprising to see based on the timelines of the wastewater treatment plant project, which is largely driving the overall expenses this year at just over 13 million in the sewer fund. So the majority of expenses are capital in nature at almost $21 million. So that makes up 58% of the overall expenditure budget, with the operating budget sitting at $10.5 million or 29% of the overall budget. The operating budget is fairly consistent with previous years. Capital budget is sitting a little bit higher due to the timelines of the wastewater treatment plant project. And then we have the transfers to reserve fund and transfers out to other agencies sitting at 13% of the budget, or almost 4.7 million. So moving on to the funding sources and the revenues for these expenditure requirements. The pink columns, column F, L, and M, are the property taxation or municipal taxation related columns. And so I'll just focus on those for a moment. I will go into overall taxation just for a moment here. It's looking like 13% of the budget, which is the balancing figure and the way we show the pressure on taxation at this stage, when we are in a process or at a point in time where the financial plan is not balanced. We put the balancing figure in the taxation column. That does not mean that we're going to be taxing 4.8 million to cover off that expenditure in the year. What that means is we have more work to do as a management team to sit down and figure out how we can minimize the impact in this column here by looking at the various projects and programs within the different service areas. And so the management team will go away after today's meeting, take the feedback from and direction from council during today's discussions, and work on balancing the financial plan. We have the restart grant allocation sitting in similar departments than we saw last year, providing additional services in the area of bylaw services and PPE equipment and public works. So we're estimating at about 248,000 being allocated this year. And I do have some more slides showing the allocation of all of those funds in a few moments that I'll show council. User fees and charges are sitting at 12% of the budget. And so consistent with prior years, we typically see user fees and charges funding a similar amount in revenues as taxation in the year. So those percentages are looking consistent. However, keeping in mind that we will be seeing likely an impact in this taxation column as we balance the financial plan. Grants are sitting at a similar percentage of 13%. And we have the other larger revenue sources, which is borrowing at 36%, and that's related to the wastewater treatment plant project. In the capital and infrastructure levy column, the total infrastructure levy this year is 1,729,092. That is an increase over last year, and I will go into that in a bit more detail when I have more information in front of council. So that's 5% of the budget, and will be fully through property taxation this year. Debt servicing is likely looking lower to council, and I'll go into that in more detail as to why later on in the presentation. The only amount we're required to tax for debt servicing, long-term debt servicing this year is $51,890, which is our long-term debenture debt for water upgrades we did a number of years ago. So currently this worksheet for illustrative purposes is showing as balanced because the balancing figure is going into the taxation column. So the financial plan is currently out of balance, about $1.162 million. And so we have quite a bit of work to do to work on determining the most appropriate tax increase to meet all of our program and capital requirements this year, and to determine whether we can move out some of the timelines for the proposed projects and programs. So this just illustrates some of the statistics that are pulled from that consolidated worksheet, showing where the majority of revenues are coming from, which are borrowing this year, which is related to the wastewater treatment plant. So those funds will be coming in as revenue, and then we're going to enter a debt servicing period through construction, showing that the debt will be locking in a later year, which I'll go over in a moment. Property taxation and grants, as well as user fees and charges, are almost equivalent revenue sources at 12 and 13%, with contributions at 11%. That's largely made up of the MRDT and OAP coming in and flowing out to Tourism Tofino and the Tofino Housing Corporation. We have reserves sitting at 8% this year, which compared to prior years is lower. And what I typically say is that we see a correlation between the percentage of capital expenditures and the percentage of reserve funds in the year, because we typically use reserve funds to pay for the capital expenditures in the year. Where we are seeing the other sources of funds made up to meet that 58% in capital expenditures over here, they're coming from borrowing for the wastewater treatment plant, as well as grants of 13% and then reserve funds of 8%. So our overall budget is made up of 29% of operating expenses, 13% in transfers, and 58% of capital. So just some general information on the financial plan and how it was prepared. The general fund includes a 4% tax increase on the base level of taxation this year. That is a starting point for us based on calculations I have done and assumptions that I have made with respect to how I see the expenses rising as a result of inflation and some of those cost drivers that we've seen and prices we've come in for administrative costs and services that we will require throughout the year. That amount is subject to change as I receive more information regarding services that we do require between now and the time we balance the financial plan. So for the purposes of today's discussion, we are starting with a 4% tax increase on the base level of taxation, but would like to keep in mind that we're going to continue this discussion throughout the financial planning process as we continue to discuss property taxation, tax rates, and council then has an opportunity to see what the impact will be on the tax bill before making a decision. So today, for discussion purposes, we are using a 4% tax increase on that base level. Contingency in the general fund is set at 5% of that base level of taxation, which excludes that C&I levy amount and any amounts used for debt servicing on long-term debt. So the 2022 contingency is estimated at $185,334 for this year. I think we've said this enough that the plan presented today is not a balanced plan. The assessment values, tax rates, and the non-market change amounts that we will present today are subject to change. All of these amounts are based on the completed assessment roll we receive in January. The final assessment roll we receive towards the middle or late March. The water fund has a contingency set at 10% of budgeted user fees. So that's estimated at $87,838. And that's looking like that will be an appropriate amount for 2022. The sewer fund similarly is sitting at a 10% contingency at $79,054. So the water and the sewer funds are currently not balanced. We are close to balancing those funds and don't see a reason to significantly change those budgets that much in order to get to a balanced state, but we are going to have to look at some of the program expenditures or user fees to determine what we might need to do there to meet our requirements in those funds. So the utility rates increased by 4%, fixed and variable fees on January 1st of 2022. So this was part of the 2022 rate review and adopted in the rate bylaw by council last year. So those rates will increase or have increased as of January 1st and will be reflected on the first quarter billings, which go out in April of this year. Stage 2 of the review does continue and the timelines for that have been delayed. We originally expected to have this portion of the review completed prior to the end of 2021, but given competing priorities, we weren't able to complete this review. So this review, just to remind council, will include a review of the rate structure, including the classes in which we charge under, review of consumption levels and demand analysis, what our revenue requirements are going forward, and redevelopment of the sewer utility charges in anticipation of the operating the wastewater treatment plant. Also increased this year are business license fees. They increased 20% in 2022, and they will increase another 20% in 2023. This excludes short-term rentals, and after that time, there will be a 2% increase per year. So those amounts are all these increases are reflected in the draft financial plan that council has today. So I wanted to provide a brief update on the COVID restart grants. In November of 2022, we were notified and received $822,000, and we had the ability to use it for multiple purposes, which include addressing revenue shortfalls, facility reopening, and operating costs. So where we saw pressures and increases in expenditures as a result of the pandemic, we were able to use those funds to help minimize that impact locally and on taxation. So for emergency planning and response costs, bylaw enforcement, we continue to allocate funds there and make sure that we have the computer and electronic technology to keep up with our virtual communications and meetings. So we retroactively applied some of this grant to 2020 operations of $248,340. Our estimated expenditures, which is pre-audited at this point,